Gotcha! Yes! We're back! Hi, lovelies. We're back with Storytime with Chris after dark. So, as I always say, you don't have to watch these videos when they go live. You're more than welcome to watch them in your downtime, nap time, max, relax, and chillaxing time. In between time, mean time, scheme time, stay time, break time, CP time. Anytime that you want to hear a highly animated voice bring you wonderful stories, magic, fantasy, science fiction, adventure, and many, many more in between. Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Chris After Dark for my adult fans. So typically we would do this on a Friday night at 9, but I ended up having a bit of a scheduling issue, so I rescheduled it for tomorrow. Well, today. Yesterday I scheduled it for tomorrow. There we go. So, welcome. And as I say on these particular videos, if you are not 18 and older, you should not be watching this video. This video is not for you. This is only for the adult fans for Storytime. What we're reading is a bit more mature content, even though it is a fantasy. It is not appropriate for those under the age of 18. So, like I said, and I will continue to repeat, if you are not 18 and older, please log off this video. Watch Paw Patrol, PJ Masks, Miraculous Ladybug, He-Man, Voltron, Animaniacs, Thundercats, anything else but this. Okay? There we go. Let's go ahead and get started as we enter into a new part of the story. Part 2, Gillikin, which is a region of Oz, which, by the way... Oh no. I think it's in these. Aha, yep. Okay. So, if you can see the map, that is the map of Oz. In the center, right here, is the Emerald City. Over here is Munchkinland, Quadling countries down here, and up north, if I'm not mistaken, is Gillikin country, and then to the west is the Wiki country, or the Vinkus. There we go. Now we can see the whole land of Oz. The Glickus and the Ogaba. Alright. Now. Galinda. 1. Whitaker, Seneca, Wickersan turning, Red Sand, Dixie House change at Dixie House for shiz. Stay aboard this coach for all points east. Tennekin, Broxhall, and all destinations to tram. The conductor paused to catch his breath. Next stop, Whitaker next. Galinda clutched her parcel of clothes to her breast. The old goat who sprawled on the seat across from her was missing the Whitaker stop. She was glad that trains made passengers sleepy. She didn't want to keep avoiding his eye. At the last minute before she was to board the train, her minder, Amma Clutch, had stepped on a rusty nail and, terrified of the frozen face syndrome, had begged permission to go to the nearest surgery for medicines and calming spells. I can surely get myself to shiz alone, Galinda had said coldly. Don't bother with me, Amma Clutch. And Amma Clutch hadn't. Galinda hoped that Amma Clutch would suffer a little frozenness of jaw before being well enough to show up in shiz and chaperone Galinda through whatever was to come. And her own chin was set, she believed, to imply a worldly boredom with train travel. In fact, she had never been more than a day's carriage ride away from her family home in the little market town of Frodica. The railway line laid down a decade ago had meant that old dairy farmers were being cut up for country estates for the merchants and manufacturers of shiz. But Galinda's family continued to prefer rural Gillikin with its fox haunts, its dripping dells, its secluded ancient pagan temples to Lurleen. To them, shiz was a distant urban treat, and even the convenience of rail transportation hadn't tempted them to risk all its complications, curiosities, and evil ways. Galinda didn't see the verdant world through the glass of the carriage. She saw her own reflection instead. She had the nearsightedness of youth. She reasoned that because she was beautiful, she was significant, though what she signified, and to whom, was not clear to her yet. The sway of her head made her creamy ringlets swing, catching the light like so many jostling stacks of coins. Her lips were perfect, as powdered as an opening Maya flower, and colored as brightly red. Her green traveling gown with its instant panels of ochre musset suggested wealth, while the black shawl draping just so above the shoulders was a nod to her academic inclinations. She was, after all, on her way to shiz because she was smart. But there is more than one way to be smart. She was 17. The whole town of Frodica had seen her off. The first girl from the Perther Hills to be accepted at shiz. She had written well in the entrance exams, a meditation on learning ethics from the natural world. Do flowers regret being plucked for a bouquet? Do the rains practice abstinence? Can animals really choose to be good? Or a moral philosophy of springtime. She had quoted excessively from the Asiod. A rapturous prose had captivated the board of examiners. A 3-year fellowship to Crage Hall. It wasn't one of the better colleges. Those were still closed to female students, but it was Shiz University. Which, let's keep in mind, because I know some people have seen Wicked the movie and have gotten this a bit confused. So let's be very clear. This book is from 1995, though it does have the modern day cover of the movie because it's promoting that. The original novel was made in 1995, which predates Harry Potter, so the idea of a magical school academia setting is not an original idea from J.K. Rowling. I want to make that very clear, even in the midst of the popularity of that series. And as a former fan of that series, yes, it is unique in its own way, but it is not the first of its kind. And keeping in mind that this is a college, and you don't just learn magic, you learn, well, we're going to find out more. Her companion in the compartment, waking up when the conductor came through, stretched his heels as he yawned. "Would you be so kind as to reach my ticket? It's in the overhead," he said. Galinda stood and found the ticket, aware that the bearded old thing was eyeing her commonly figure. Here you are," she said, and he answered, "Not to me, dearie, to the conductor. Without opposable thumbs, I have no hope of managing such a tiny piece of cardboard." The conductor punched the ticket and said, "You're the rare beast that can afford to travel first class." "Oh," said the goat, "I object to the term beast, but the laws still allow my traveling in first class, I presume." "Money's money," said the conductor without ill will, punching Galinda's ticket and returning it to her. "No money's not money," said the goat. "Not when my ticket costs double what the young ladies did. In this case, money is a visa. I happen to have it." "Going up to shiz, are you?" said the conductor to Galinda, ignoring the goat's remark. "I can tell by that academic shawl." "Oh, well, it's something to do," said Galinda. She didn't care to talk to conductors. But when he continued along down the carriage, Galinda found that she liked even less the baleful look that the goat was giving her. "Do you expect to learn anything at shiz?" he asked. "I've already learned not to speak to strangers." "Then I will introduce myself, and we will be strangers no longer. I am Dillamond." "I am disinclined to know you." "I am a fellow of Shiz University on the Faculty of Biological Arts." "You're a shabby dresser, even for a goat," Galinda thought. Money isn't everything. "Then I must overcome my natural shyness. My name is Galinda. I am of the Arduena clan on my mother's side." "Let me be the first to welcome you to Shiz, Galinda. This is your first year." "Please, it is Galinda. The proper old Gilliganese pronunciation, if you don't mind." She could not bring herself to call him sir, not with that horrid goatee and the tatty waistcoat that looked cut from some public house carpet. "I wonder what you think of the wizard's proposed bans on travel." The goat's eyes were buttery and warm and frightening. Galinda had never heard of any bans. She said as much. Dillamond, was it Dr. Dillamond, explained in a conversational tone that the wizard had thoughts of restricting animal travel in public conveyances except in designated transports. Galinda replied that animals had always enjoyed separate services. "No, I am speaking of animals," said Dillamond, "those with a spirit." So, what we're going to come into discussion with throughout this whole book, specifically this whole book, and later in book 3, is that there's animals with a capital A. Those are the animals that have sentience and have the ability to understand human speech, and not only that, to be able to articulate it back. These are animals that not only can go on all fours, but can also stand bipedally and can articulate their thoughts and feelings and emotions and worries and joys, just like any normal human being could. And they're very much so able to do for themselves. They are not base creatures. And then there are lowercase animals, which are animals that do not have the ability to speak or have lost the ability to speak and are just dumb beasts. So there's a difference. As he explained, those with a spirit.
Oh, those, said Galinda crudely. Well, I don't see the problem.
My, said Dillamon, don't you indeed? The goatee quivered. He was irritated. He began to hector her about animal rights. As things now stood, his own ancient mother couldn't afford to travel first class and would have to ride in a pen when she wanted to visit him in Shiz. If the wizard's bands went through the Hall of Approval as they were likely to do, the goat himself would be required by law to give up the privileges he had earned through years of study, training, and saving. Is that right for a creature with a spirit, he said, from here to there to here, in a pen?
I quite agree. Traveling is so broadening, said Galinda.
They endured the rest of the trip, including the change across the platform at Dixie House, in a frosty silence. Seeing her fright at the size and bustle of the terminus at Shiz, Dillamon took pity and offered to engage a carriage to take her to Crage Hall. She followed him, looking as unmortified as she could manage. Her luggage came behind on the backs of a couple of porters. Shiz! She tried not to gawp. Everyone hustling on business, laughing and hurrying and kissing, dodging carriages while the buildings of Railway Square, brownstone and bluestone, covered with vine and moss, steamed softly in the sunlight. The animals and the animals. She had scarcely ever come across even the odd chicken squawking philosophically in Frodica. But here was a quartet of Sizbras at an outdoor cafe dressed flashily in black and white satin stripes on the bases to their inboard design, and an elephant on its hind legs directing traffic, and a tiger dressed up in some sort of exotic religious garb, a kind of monk or mont or nun or something else. Yes, it was Sizbras and elephant and tiger, and she supposed goat with a capital G. She would have to get used to enunciating the capital letters, or else she would show off her country origins. Mercifully, Dillamon found her a carriage with a human driver and directed him to Crage Hall and paid him in advance, for which Galinda had to come up with a weak smile of appreciation. Our paths will cross again, said Dillamon gallantly if curtly, as if putting forth a prophecy, and he disappeared as the carriage jolted forward. Galinda sank back into the cushions. She began to be sorry that Alma Clutch had punctured her foot with a nail. Crage Hall was only 20 minutes from Railway Square. Behind its own bluestone walls, the complex was set with large watery glass windows enlaced in formation, a tessellation of quatrefolds and blind multifoils ran riot at the roofline. The appreciation of architecture was Galinda's private passion, and she pored over the features she could identify. Along the vines and flat moss fudged many of the finer details of the buildings. Too soon she was whisked inside. The headmistress of Crage Hall, a fish-faced, upper-class Gillicanese woman wearing a lot of cloisony bangles, was greeting new arrivals in the atrium. The head eschewed the drabness of a professional woman's dress that Galinda had expected. Instead, the imposing woman was bedecked in a currant-colored gown with patterns of black jet swirling over the bodice like dynamic markings on sheet music. I am Madame Morrible, she said to Galinda. Her voice was basso profondo, her grip crippling, her posture military, her earrings like holiday tree ornaments. Flourishes all around, and a quick cup of tea in the parlor. Then we'll assemble in the main hall and sort you out as to roomies. The parlor was filled with pretty young women, all wearing green or blue and trailing black shawls like exhausted shadows behind them. Galinda was glad for the natural advances of her flaxen hair and stood by a window so the light could dazzle itself off her curls. She hardly sipped the tea. In a side room, the attendant Amos were serving themselves from a metal urn and laughing and yakking already as if they were old friends from the same village. It was somewhat grotesque, all these dumpy women smiling at each other, making marketplace noise. Galinda hadn't read the fine print very closely. She hadn't realized there would be need for roomies. Or perhaps had her parents paid extra so she could have a private room. And where would Alma Clutch stay? Looking about her, she could tell that some of the dollies came from families much better off than hers. The pearls and diamonds on them. Galinda was glad she had chosen a simple silver collar with Mennonite struts. There was something vulgar about traveling in jewels. As she realized this truth, she codified it into a saying. At the earliest perfect opportunity, she would bring it out as proof of her having opinions and of having traveled.
The overdressed traveler betrays more interest in being seen than in seeing, she murmured, trying it out, while the true traveler knows that the novel world about her serves as the most appropriate accessory. Good. Very good.
Madame Morrible counted heads, gripped a cup of tea, and shooed everyone into the main hall. There, Galinda learned that allowing Alma Clutch to go looking for a surgery had been a colossal mistake. Apparently, all that chatter among Almas had been frivolous and social. They had been instructed to sort out among them whose young lady would room with whose. The Almas had been relied upon to get the numb of the matter more quickly than the students themselves. No one had spoken for Galinda. She had gone unrepresented. After the forgettable welcome remarks, as couple by couple the students and Almas left to locate their lodgings and settle in, Galinda found herself growing pale with embarrassment. Alma Clutch, the old fool, would have fixed her up nicely with someone just a notch or two above on the social ladder, near enough that Galinda would suffer no shame, and above enough to make it worth the while of socializing. But now all the better young misses were linked together, diamond to diamond, emerald to emerald, for all she could tell. As the room began to empty, Galinda wondered if she shouldn't go up and interrupt Madame Morrible and explain the problem. Glinda was, after all, an Arduina of the uplands, at least on one side. It was a hideous accident. Her eyes teared up. But she hadn't the nerve. She stayed perched on the edge of the fragile, stupid chair, except for herself. All the center of the room had cleared out, and the shire more useless girls were left around the edges in the shadows. Surrounded by an obstacle course of empty gilded chairs, Galinda alone sat like an unclaimed valise. "Now, the rest of you are here without Almas, I understand," said Madame Morrible a bit stiffly. "Since we require chaperonage, I will assign each of you one of the 3 dormitories for freshers, which sleep 15 girls each. There is no social stigma to the dormitory, I might add. None at all." But she was lying, not even convincingly. Galinda finally stood up.
"Please, Madame Morrible, there's a mistake. I'm Galinda of the Arduinas. My Alma took a nail in her foot on the voyage and was detained for a day or 2. I'm not in the dormitory class, you see."
"How sad for you," said Madame Morrible, smiling. "I'm sure your Alma will be pleased to be a chaperone in, shall we say, the pink dormitory, 4th floor on the right."
No, she would not," interrupted Galinda quite bravely. "I am not here to sleep in a dormitory, pink or otherwise. You have misunderstood."
"I have not misunderstood, Miss Galinda," said Madame Morrible, growing even more fish-like as her eyes began to bulge. "There is accident, there is tardiness, there are decisions to be made. As you were not equipped through your Alma to make your own decision, I am empowered to make it for you. Please, we are busy, and I must name the other girls who will join you in the pink dormitory."
"I would have a private word with you, madam," said Galinda in desperation. "For myself, dormitory partners, or a single roomie, it is no matter, but I cannot recommend that you ask my Alma to oversee other girls, for reasons I might not say in public."
She was lying as fast as she could and better than Madame Morrible, who seemed at least intrigued. "You strike me as impertinent, Miss Galinda," she said mildly.
"I have not yet struck you, Madame Morrible."
Galinda delivered the daring lie with her sweetest smile. Madame Morrible chose not to laugh. "Thank Lurleen, a spark of spunk. You may come to my chambers this evening and tell me the story of your Alma's shortcomings, as I should know them, but I will compromise with you, Miss Galinda. Unless you object, I will have to ask your Alma to chaperone both you and another girl, one who comes without an Alma. For you see, all the other students with Almas are already paired off, and you are the odd one out."
"I am certain my Alma could manage that, at least."
Madame Morrible scanned the pages of names and said, Very well, to join Miss Galinda of the Arduinas in a double room. Shall I invite the Throp 3rd descending of Nest Hardings? Elphaba." No one stirred. "Elphaba?" said Madame Morrible again, adjusting her bangles and pressing 2 fingers at the bottom of her throat. The girl was in the back of the room, a pauper in a red dress with gaudy fretwork and a clumpy old people's boots. At first, Galinda thought what she saw was some trick of the light, a reflection of the adjacent buildings covered in vines and flat moss. But as Elphaba moved forward, lugging her own carpet bags, it became obvious that she was green. A hatchet-faced girl with putrescent green skin and long, forward-looking black hair, a Muchgelander by birth, though with many childhood years spent in Quadling country, read Madame Morrible from her notes. How fascinating for us all, Miss Elphaba. We shall look forward to hearing tales of exotic climes and times. Miss Galinda and Miss Elphaba, here are your keys. You may take room 22 on the second floor. She smiled broadly at Galinda as the girls came forward. Travel is so broadening, she intoned. Galinda started. The curse of her own words lobbed back at her. She curtsied and fled. Elphaba, eyes on the floor, followed behind. 2. By the time Alma Clutched arrived the next day, her foot bandaged to 3 times its natural size, Elphaba had already unpacked her few belongings. They hung rag-like on hooks in the cupboard, thin, shapeless shifts shamed into a corner by the fulsome hoops and starched bustles and padded shoulders and cushioned elbows of Galinda's wardrobe. I am happy as cheese to be your Alma too. Don't matter to me, said Alma Clutch, smiling broadly in Elphaba's direction, before Galinda had a chance to get Alma Clutch alone and demand that her minder refuse. Of course my papa's paying you to be my Alma, said Galinda meaningfully, but Alma Clutch answered, Not as much as all that, ducky. Not as much as all that. I can be making up my own mind. In layman's terms, she said, Girl, hush and sit your ass down. Alma, said Galinda when Elphaba left to see the mildewy facilities. Alma, are you blind? That Muchgelander girl is green. Odd, isn't it? I thought all Muchgelanders were tiny. She's a proper height, though. I guess they come in a variety of sizes. Oh, are you bothered by the green? Well, it might do you some good if you let it. You affect worldly airs, Galinda, but you don't know the world yet. I think it's a lark. Why not? Why ever not? It's not yours to organize my education, worldly or otherwise, Alma Clutch. No, my dear, said Alma Clutch, you've made this mess all by your lonesome. I'm merely being of service. So Galinda was stuck. Last night's brief interview with Madame Morrible had not provided any escape route either. Galinda had arrived promptly in a dotted morpholine skirt with lace bodice, a vision, as she said to herself, in nocturnal purples and midnight blues. Madame Morrible bade her enter the reception room, in which a small cluster of leather chairs and a settee were drawn up before an unnecessary fire. The head poured mint tea and offered crystallized ginger wrapped in pearl fruit leaves. She indicated a chair for Galinda, but herself stood by the mantelpiece like a big game hunter. In the best tradition of the upper class, savoring its luxuries, they sipped and nibbled in silence at first. This gave Galinda the chance to observe that Madame Morrible was fish-like, not merely in countenance, but in dress. Her loose-fitting cream foxile flowed with a huge, airy bladder from the high-front neckline to the knees, where it was tightly gathered and dropped straight to the floor, hugging the calves and ankles in neat, anticlimactic pleats. She looked for all the world like a giant carp in a men's club, and a dull, bored carp at that, not even a sentient carp. Now your Alma, my dear, the reason she's incapable of supervising a dormitory, I'm all ears. Galinda had taken all afternoon to prepare. You see, Madam Head, I did like to say it publicly, but Alma Clutch suffered a terrible fall last summer when we were picnicking in the Prother Hills. She reached for a handful of wild mountain thyme and went pitching over a cliff. She lay for weeks in a coma, and when she emerged, she had no memory of the accident at all. If you asked her about it, she wouldn't even know what you meant. Amnesia by trauma. Terrible. I see. How very tiresome for you. But why does that make her unequal to the job I proposed?
She has become addled. Alma Clutch on occasion gets confused as to what has life and what doesn't. She will sit and talk to, say a chair, and then relate its history back to us. Its aspirations, its reservations, its joys, its sorrows, said Madame Morrible. How truly novel, the emotional life of furniture. I never... But silly as this is, and a cause for hours of merriment, the corollary ailment is more alarming. Madame Morrible, I must tell you that Alma Clutch sometimes forgets that people are alive, or animals. Galinda paused, then added, or animals even. Go on, my dear. It is all right for me because Alma has been my Alma all my life. And I know her ways. But you can sometimes forget a person is there or needs her or is a person. Once she cleaned a wardrobe and tipped it over into the houseboy breaking his back. She didn't even register his screaming right there, right at her feet. She folded the nightclothes and had a conversation with my mother's evening gown, asking it all sorts of impertinent questions. What a fascinating condition, said Madame Morrible, and how vexing for you, really. I couldn't have allowed her to accept responsibilities for 14 other girls, Galinda confided. For me alone, there is no problem. I love the foolish old woman in a way. Madame Morrible had said, but what of your roomie? Can you jeopardize her well-being? I didn't ask for her. Galinda looked ahead in her glazed, unblinking eye. The poor Munchkinlander appears to be used to a life of distress. Either she will adjust, or, I assume, she will petition you to be removed from my room. Unless, of course, you feel it in your duty to move her for her own safety. Madame Morrible said, I suppose Miss Elphaba cannot live with what we give her. She will leave Crage Hall on her own accord, don't you think? It was the we in what we give her. Madame Morrible was binding Galinda into a campaign. They both knew it. Galinda struggled to maintain her autonomy, but she was only 17, and she had suffered that same indignity of exclusion in the main hall just hours ago. She didn't know what Madame Morrible could have against Elphaba except the looks of her. But there was something. There was clearly something. What was it? She sensed it to be wrong somehow. Don't you think, dear, said Madame Morrible, bowing a bit forward like a fish, arching in a slow-motion leap. Well, of course, we must do what we can, said Galinda as vaguely as possible. But she seemed the fish and caught on a most clever hook. Out of the shadows of the reception room came a small tick-tock thing about 3 feet high, made of burnished bronze with an identifying plate screwed into its front. The plate said Smith and Tinker's Mechanical Man in ornate script. The clockwork servant collected the empty teacups and whirled itself away. Galinda didn't know how long it had been there or what it had heard, but she had never liked tick-tock creatures, which basically tick-tock creatures is just a fancy way of saying Oz's version of a robot. They basically are steampunk-esque creatures that work through screws and springs. So when you turn the key of their back, it allows them to have movement and thought and ability to do whatever they need to do. But it does time out, so you have to rewound them again. There we go. Winding them up. Elphaba had a bad case of what Galinda called the reading sulks. Elphaba didn't curl up. She was too bony to curl, but she jackknifed herself nearer to herself, her funny pointed green nose poking in the moldy leaves of a book. She played with her hair while she read, coiled it up and laid down around fingers so thin and twig-like as to seem almost exoskeletal. Her hair never curled, no matter how often Elphaba twined it around her hands. It was beautiful hair in an odd, awful way, with a shine like the pelt of a healthy gilt beast. Black silk, coffee spun into threads, night rain. Galinda, not given to metaphor on the whole, found Elphaba's hair entrancing. The more so because the girl was so otherwise, so ugly. They didn't talk much. Galinda was too busy forging alliances with the better girls, who had been her rightful roomie prospects. No doubt she could switch rooms at half-term, or at any rate next fall. So Galinda left Elphaba alone, and she flew down the hall to gossip with her new friends, Milla, Fanny, and Shen. Just as in children's books about boarding school, each new friend was wealthier than the one before. At first, Galinda didn't mention who her roomie was, and Elphaba showed no sign of expecting Galinda's company, which was a relief. But the gossip had to start sooner or later. The first wave of discussion about Elphaba concerned her wardrobe and her evident poverty, as if her classmates were above noticing her sickly and sickening color.
Someone told me that Madam Head had said Miss Alphaba was the Throp third descending from Nest Hardings, said Fene, who was also a Muchkalander, but one of diminutive stock, not full size like the Throp family. The Throps are highly regarded in Nest Hardings and even beyond. The eminent Throp put together the area's militia and tore up the yellow brick road that the Ozma region had been laying when we were all small, before the glorious revolution. There was no callousness in the eminent Throp or his wife or family, including his granddaughter Melina, you can be assured. By callousness, of course, Fene meant greenness. But how the mighty have fallen. She's as ragged as a gypsy, observed Milla. Have you ever seen such tawdry dresses? Her Amma should be sacked.
She has no Amma, I think,
said Chen. Galinda, who knew for sure, said nothing. They said she spent time in Quadling country, Milla went on. Perhaps her family had been exiled as criminals?
Or they were spectators in rubies,
said Chen. Then where's the wealth? Snapped Milla. Speculators in rubies did very well, Miss Chen. Our Miss Alphaba does have 2 barter tokens to rub together and call her own. Perhaps it's a kind of religious calling, a chosen poverty, suggested Fene, and at this nonsense they all threw back their heads and chortled. Alphaba, coming into the buttery for a cup of coffee, caused them to escalate into louder roars of laughter. Elphaba did not look over at them, but every other student did glance their way, each girl longing to be included in the jollity, which made the 4 new friends feel just fine. Galinda was slowly coming to terms with actual learning. She had considered her admission into Shiz University as a sort of testimony to her brilliance. I believe she would adorn the halls of learning with her beauty and occasional clever sayings. She supposed glumly that she meant to be a sort of living marble bust. This is youthful intelligence. Admire her. Isn't she lovely? Hello. Wow. It hadn't been dawned on Galinda that there was more to learn, and furthermore that she was expected to do it. The education all the new girls chiefly wanted, of course, had nothing to do with Madame Morrible or the prattling animals at lecterns and undiases. What the girls wanted wasn't equations or quotations or orations. They wanted Shiz itself, city life. The broad, offensive panoply of life and life, seamlessly intertwined. Galinda was relieved that Elphaba never took part in the outings the Almas organized. Since they had often stopped at lunchroom for a modest meal, the weekly brigade became known informally as the Chowder and Marching Society. The university district was aflame with autumn color, just of dying leaves and also fraternity pennants fluttering from rooftop and spire. Galinda soaked up the architecture of Shiz, here and there mostly in protected college yards and side streets. There we go. The oldest surviving domestic architecture still leaned, ancient, wattled, and daubed, and exposed stud framing held up like paralytic grannies by stronger, newer relatives on either side. Then in dizzying succession, unparalleled glories, bloodstone medieval, Murthic. Galantine with its symmetries and restraint. Galantine reformed with all these festering OGs and broken pediments. Bluestone revival. Imperium bombast and industrial modern, or as the critics in the liberal press put it, high hostile crud style, the form propagated by the modernity-minded Wizard of Oz. Beside architecture, the excitement was tame, to be sure. On one notable occasion, which no Craig Hall girl present ever forgot, the senior boys from 3 Queens College across the canal for a lark and a dare had tanked themselves up with beer in the middle of the afternoon and had hired a white bear violinist and had gone down to dance together under the willow trees wearing nothing but their clinging cotton drawers and their school scarves. It was deliciously pagan. And as they sit in an old chipped statue of Lurleen the Fairy Queen on a 3-legged stool, and she seemed to smile at their loose-gibbed gaiety. The girls in the Almas pretended shock, but poorly. They lingered, watching until horrified proctors from 3 Queens came rushing out to round the revelers up. Near nudity was one thing, but public Lurleenism, even as a joke, bordered on being intolerable retrograde, even royalist, and they did not do in the wizard's reign. So, fun fact, Lurleen is the fairy goddess that created the land of Oz. She was a fairy celestial being who had a chariot, rolled over into the heavens, and never came back, but she left a child. And her child was named Ozma, which is where the name of Oz comes from. The first royal was a girl named Ozma. And they all had different identifying titles to their names. So there's Ozma the Bilious, Ozma the Disconcerted, Ozma Tipitarius, and so on and so forth. One Saturday evening, when the Almas had a rare night off and had taken themselves into a pleasure faith meeting in Ticknor Circus, Galinda had a brief and silly squabble with Fanny and Shinshin, after which she had retired early to her bedchamber, complaining of a headache. Elphaba was sitting up in her bed with the commissary brown blanket tucked around her. She was hunched forward over a book as usual, and her hair hung down like brackets on each side of her face. She looked to Galinda like one of those etchings. The natural history books were full of them, of old winky mountain women who hid their strangeness with a shawl over the head. Elphaba was munching on the pips of an apple, having eaten all the rest of it.
Well, you look cozy enough, Miss Elphaba,
said Galinda challengingly. In 3 months, it was the first social remark she had managed to make to her roomie. Looks are only looks, said Elphaba, not looking up.
Will it break your concentration if I sit in front of the fire?
You cast a shadow if you sit just there.
Oh, sorry, said Galinda and moved. Mustn't cast shadows, mustn't we, when urgent words are waiting to be read?
Elphaba was back in her book already and didn't answer.
What the dickens are you reading night and day?
It seemed as if Elphaba were coming up for air from a still isolated pool. Well, I don't read the same thing every day, you know. Tonight I'm reading some of the speeches of the early Unionist fathers.
Why ever would anyone want to do that?
I don't know. I don't even know if I want to read them. I'm just reading them.
But why? Miss Elphaba the Delirious, why? Why?
Elphaba looked up at Galinda and smiled. Elphaba the Delirious. I like it. Before she had a chance to bite it back, Galinda returned the smile, and at the same time a sweeping wind sent a handful of hail against the glass, and the latch broke. Galinda leaped to swing the casement shut, but Elphaba scuttled to the far corner of the room, away from the wet.
Give me the leather luggage grip, Miss Elphaba, from inside my satchel. They're on the shelf behind the hat boxes. Yes, and I'll secure this until we can get the porter to fix it tomorrow.
Elphaba found the strap, but in doing so, the hat boxes tumbled down and 3 colorful hats rolled out onto the cold floor, while Galinda scrambled up on the chair to organize the window shut again. Elphaba returned the hats to their boxes.
Oh, try it on. Try that one on, said Galinda.
She meant to have something to laugh at, to tell Miss Fanny and Shinshin about, and so as to work her way back into their good graces. Oh, I daren't, Miss Galinda, Elphaba said, and went to set the hat away.
No, do, I insist, Galinda said, for a lark. I've never seen you in something pretty.
I don't wear pretty things.
What's the harm, said Galinda. Just here. No one else need see you.
Elphaba stood facing the fire, but turned her head on her shoulders to look long and unblinkingly at Galinda, who had not yet hopped down from the chair. The Munchkin Lander was in her nightgown, a drab sack with benefit of lace edging and piping. The green face above the white-gray fabric seemed almost to glow, and the glorious long, straight black hair fell right over where beasts should have been if she were ever reveal any evidence that she possessed them. Elphaba looked like something between an animal and an animal, like something more than life, but not quite life. There was an expectancy, but no intuition. Was that it? Like a child who had never remembered having a dream being told to have sweet dreams. You'd almost call it unrefined, but not in a social sense. More in a sense of nature not having done its full job with Elphaba. Not quite having managed to make her enough like herself.
Oh, put the damn hat on, really, said Galinda,
for whom, where introspection was concerned, enough was enough. Elphaba obliged. The thing was the lovely roundel bought from the best milliner in the Pertha Hills. It had orangey swags and a yellow lace net that could be draped to achieve varying degrees of disguise. On the wrong head it looked ghastly, and Galinda expected to have a bite the inside of her lip to keep from laughing. It was the kind of super feminine thing boys in a pantomime wore when they pretended to be girls. But Elphaba dropped the whole sugary plate onto her strange pointed head and looked at Galinda again from underneath the broad brim. She seemed like a rare flower, her skin stem-like in its soft, pearlescent sheen, the hat a botanical riot.
"Oh, Miss Elphaba," said Galinda, "you terrible mean thing. You're pretty."
"Oh, now you've lied. So go confess to the Unionist minister," said Elphaba. "Is there a looking glass?"
"Of course there is, down the hall in the lavatory."
"Not there. I'm not going to be seen by those ninnies in this."
"Well then," decided Galinda, "can you find an angle without hiding the firelight and look at your reflection in the dark window?"
They both gazed at the green and flowery spectre reflected in the watery old glass, surrounded by the blackness driven through with the wild rain beyond. A maple fruit leaf shaped like a star with blunted points or like a heart grown lopsided, suddenly whirled out of the night and plastered itself on the reflection in the glass, gleaming red and reflecting the firelight, just where the heart would be, so as to seem from the angle which Galinda stood.
"Entrancing," she said. "There's some strange, exotic quality of beauty about you. I never thought."
"Surprise," said Elphaba, and then nearly blushed, if darker green constituted a blush. "I mean, surprise, not beauty. It's just surprise. Well, what do you know? It's not beauty."
"Who am I to argue?"
said Galinda, tossing her curls and striking a pose, and Elphaba actually laughed at that. And Galinda laughed back, partly horrified as she did so. Elphaba tore the hat off then and returned it to its box, where she picked up her book again. Galinda said,
"So what is beauty reading anyway? I mean, really, tell me. Why the old sermons?"
"My father is a Unionist minister," said Elphaba. "I'm just curious what it's all about, that's all."
"Why don't you just ask him?"
Elphaba didn't answer. Her face took on a solid waiting look like that of an owl just about to go for a mouse.
"So what are they on about? Anything interesting?"
said Galinda. No sense giving up now. There was nothing else to do, and she was too wrought up by the storm to sleep. "This one is about good and evil," said Elphaba, "whether they really exist at all."
"Oh, yawn," said Galinda. "Evil exists. I know that, and its name is boredom, and ministers are the cruelest, guiltiest crews of all."
"You don't really think that?" Galinda didn't even stop to consider whether she believed in what she said or not. The whole point of conversation was flow.
"Well, I didn't mean to insult your father. For all I know, he's an entertaining and lively preacher."
"No. I mean, do you think evil really exists?"
"Well, how do I know what I think?"
"Well, ask yourself, Miss Galinda, does evil exist?"
"I don't know. You say, does evil exist?"
"I don't expect to know." The look went slanting inwards somehow, or was it the hair swinging forward like a veil again?
"Why don't you ask your father? I don't understand. He should know. That's his job."
"My father taught me a lot," Elphaba said slowly. "He was very well educated indeed. He taught me to read and write and think and more. But not enough. I just think, like our teachers here, that if ministers are effective, they're good at asking questions to get you to think. I don't think they're supposed to have the answers. Not necessarily."
"Oh, well, tell that to our boring minister at home. He has all the answers and charges for them, too."
"But maybe there's something to what you say," said Elphaba. "I mean, evil and boredom, evil and ennui, evil and the lack of stimulation, evil and sluggish blood."
"You're writing a poem, it sounds like. Why ever would a girl be interested in evil?"
"I'm not interested in it. It's just what the early sermons are all about. So I'm thinking about what they're thinking about, that's all. Sometimes they talk about diet and not eating animals, and then I think of that. I just like to think about what I'm reading. Don't you?"
"I don't read very well, so I don't think I think very well either." Galinda smiled. "I dress to kill, though."
There was no response from Elphaba. Galinda, usually pleased that she knew the correct way to steer every conversation into a paean to herself, was flummoxed. She lamely ventured on, annoyed at having to expend the effort.
Well, whatever did those old brutes think about evil then?
It's hard to say exactly. They seem to be obsessed with locating it somewhere. I mean, an evil spring in the mountains, an evil smoke, evil blood in the veins going from parent to child. They were sort of like the early explorers of Oz. Except the maps they made were of invisible stuff, pretty inconsistent one with the other.
And where is evil located?
Galinda asked, flopping onto her bed and closing her eyes. Well, they didn't agree, did they? Or else what would they have to write sermons arguing about? Some said that the original evil was the vacuum caused by the fairy queen Lurleen leaving us alone here. When goodness removes itself, the space it occupies corrodes and becomes evil and maybe splits apart and multiplies. So every evil thing is a sign of the absence of deity.
Well, I wouldn't know an evil thing if it fell on me, said Galinda.
The early Unionists, who are a lot more Lurleenists than Unionists are today, argue that some invisible pocket of corruption was floating around the neighborhood, a direct descendant of the pain the world felt when Lurleen left, like a patch of cold air on a warm, still night. A perfectly agreeable soul might march through it and become infected and then go and kill a neighbor. But then it was your fault if you walked through a patch of badness, if you couldn't see it. There wasn't ever any council of Unionists that decided it one way or the other, and nowadays so many people don't even believe in Lurleen.
But they believe in evil still, said Galinda with a yawn. Isn't that funny that deity is passé, but the attributes and implications of deity linger?
You are thinking, Elphaba cried. Galinda raised herself to her elbows at the enthusiasm in her roommate's voice.
I'm about to sleep, because this is profoundly boring to me,
Galinda said. But Elphaba was grinning ear to ear. In the morning, Amma Clutch regaled them both with tales of the night out. There was a talented young witch in nothing but shocking pink undergarments, adorned with feathers and beads. She sang songs to the audience and collected food tokens in her cleavage from the blushing undergraduate men in the nearer tables. She did a little domestic magic, turning water into orange juice, changing cabbages into carrots, and running knives through a terrified piglet which sprouted champagne instead of blood. They all had a sip. A terrible fat man with a beard came on and chased the witch around as if he would kiss her. Oh, it was too funny, too funny. In the end, the whole cast and audience together stood and sang, "What we don't allow in the public halls." The Ammas had a riotous good time, every one of them.
Really, said Galinda stiffly. The pleasure faith is so common.
But I see the window broke, said Amma Clutch. I hope it wasn't boys trying to climb in.
Are you mad, said Galinda, in the storm?
What storm, said Amma Clutch. That doesn't make sense. Last night was as calm as moonlight.
Ha! That was some show, said Galinda. You're so caught up in pleasure faith you lost your bearings, Amma Clutch.
They went down to breakfast together, leaving Elphaba still asleep, or pretending to be asleep maybe, though as they walked along the corridors, sun through the broad windows making rakes of light on the cold slate floors. Galinda did wonder about the capriciousness of weather. Was it even possible for a storm to pitch itself against one part of town and overlook another? There was so much about the world she didn't know.
She did nothing but chat about evil, said Galinda to her friends, over buttered brisks with plowfoot jelly. Some inside tap was turned on and prattle just poured over her. And girls, when she tried on my hat, I could have died. She looked like somebody's maiden aunt come up out of the grave. I mean, frumpy as a cow. I endured it only for you, so I could tell you all. Otherwise, I'd have expired with glee on the spot. It was so very much. You poor thing, to have to be our spy and stand the shame of that grasshopper Rumi, said Fene dolefully, clasping Galinda's hand. You're too good.
And that is where we will end for tonight. I thank you all so much for joining me for Storytime, and as always, I love you and appreciate you. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other, and I will see you all next time. Bye, y'all. She's back. She's right on.